Tyre Nichols loved sunsets. He was a father. He'd been out to photograph the twilight sky in his home city of Memphis.
What happened to this guy? Probably the worst beating I've ever seen police officers give a civilian since Rodney King. It's such a bad beating that even for me, I can stomach things, things don't really bother me. This was the worst police. They kill him on camera, basically. They beat him to death. They take turns giving him haymakers. And these are not small police officers. These are big dudes. Like, I'm talking, they could kill you on one punch big. And there's, I think, 6 of them. And they're saying they pulled him over for speeding or something, or some sort of routine check. And one thing led to another. And they pulverized him. They beat the tar out of this guy to the point where he passed away 3 days later in hospital. The thing that has spun me about this the most is that these were black police officers that beat another black man to death in Memphis in a precinct that is predominantly black. I think over 60% of the officers, including the chief commissioner or whoever's in charge, is a black woman. So you would think that a little accountability would be on the people that did this, the police officers, but no. CNN and all these other stupid news outlets immediately turned to white supremacy. You explain to me how 6 black police officers beating the crap out of another black man has anything to do with white supremacy. On CNN and some other people have been saying that this is the fault of white supremacy, that these black guys had internalized racism and that is why, or they potentially had internalized racism, and so they took that out on the black guy. What I am more leaning to is that this is not a white supremacy thing. This is not a black on black thing. This is a police problem in that state. Now, I'm not someone that is against police officers, and I'm not somebody that was for the whole defund the police thing. But it's true what they say. There's white, there's black, there's brown, and then there's blue. It's not a black thing and it's not a white thing. This is a police problem. You're hiring police officers who are thugs. Those guys were thugs. And it's not that, I'm not saying they're thugs because they're black, because if a bunch of white police officers did that to a white boy, they would have been thugs as well. There's a video online of these white police officers. I can't play it on YouTube. It's also very distressing to watch. There's a kid. I think the kid might have been autistic or something. Regardless, it's a child. Teenager, I think, maybe. And they're in a hotel lobby, and these armed police officers have got machine guns out. And they're telling the boy, they're giving him all sorts of directions. Get on your stomach, put your hands up, crawl, stop. The guy's confused out of his mind. Obviously, he's shitting himself because they're aiming guns at him. He can't follow the instructions properly because he's terrified. He stands up. Now, you can see this guy's not armed. His hands are very visible. And they shoot him. They shoot this teenager in cold blood. These white police officers shoot this white boy. Those white police officers that shot that white boy are thugs as well. So all the people online, because I heard people saying it online, and you're going to hear it in this video, getting upset when people say these black police officers were thugs. They were thugs. Not because they're black, but because they are thugs. Thugs come in all colours.
The thing is that you'd think it would all not be happening so much anymore because of how bad it's been recently and the repercussions of it as well. There
needs to be some sort of reform. I don't have all the answers for it. I don't think most people do. I don't know why they're hiring people to do a job where they're supposed to protect and serve, and then they're beating people to death. Full-grown men, all over 250 pounds by the looks of it. And you're telling me you can't restrain this guy?
It's scary because these people could be innocent that you're doing it to as well.
Yeah, whatever he did, he didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve for you to beat him to death. The whole point of having the law there is to take someone in if they've committed a crime. You're not supposed to hand out vigilante justice. Let's go on the assumption that Tyre Nichols did something heinous. It's not your job to take his life. And I don't think the guy did anything. As far as I'm aware, they pulled him over because he might have been speeding or it was a routine check. And then you beat him to death. Even if he wasn't listening, there were 6 of you. You had him on the ground already. It wasn't like he was fighting you all off and he had a knife in his hand. The guy was already on the floor screaming for his mum as they were killing him. It makes no sense to me how there could be any defense of this whatsoever. And I remember when that police officer, Derek Chauvin, I think his name was, killed George Floyd, or put his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck. the entire town, city, wherever they were, America was basically up in flames, right? Everyone was protesting and rioting. They called it like the summer of love, even though I think they did over $1 billion's worth of damage in all sorts of places in America. There was all that outrage for that because it was drummed up by the media as well, regardless of what the police officer did, and what the police officer did was wrong. Regardless of that, it was drummed up. It was all over the media. That's all they spoke about. All you heard was about George Floyd. That's where the defund the police thing came from. These police officers, these black guys, killed this other black guy in cold blood. Again, one of the worst police beatings I've ever seen in my life. And where is it in the media? They spoke about it for like 2 or 3 days. Now, if you go onto CNN's homepage, it's not even the main story. It's all the way at the back. There's a bunch of sports stories before it. This is what I mean when I say the media controls people's emotions. They tell them who to be angry at. Because this wasn't a bunch of white police officers, it wasn't probably wasn't lucrative enough for them to push the idea that there should be police reform, or there should be a defund the police movement, or that people should riot and smash up businesses, because that's what they promoted before. They were actively promoting violence. That's what they were doing. I was bearing witness to it every single day, and you had people defending the idea. Now, I understand people getting emotional when George Floyd, when you watch him die on camera. Whether or not it was fentanyl, whether or not it was the police officer's knee on the neck, everyone agrees that the guy putting his knee on George Floyd's neck for that extended period of time was unnecessary. It was unnecessary. It didn't need to be done. They could have put his knee anywhere else. I understand. I watched the whole clip. I understand George Floyd's a big dude. I understand he did some pretty terrible things before that. Regardless of all that, he didn't deserve what he got. And by that same token, this guy who got the shit kicked out of him by the police did not deserve what they did to him. And yet, where is the outcry?
American police are just a shambles in every way possible.
They are. And I don't think it's all of them, because if it was all of them, then they would be in much bigger problems. They're painting the white supremacy narrative because they're saying that white police officers are basically indoctrinating black police officers, or the system, the white institution is indoctrinating these black guys to commit these murders, which completely removes any accountability for their behavior. It essentially tells black people that you're not in control of your actions. You don't have agency, basically. Like you can't think for yourself. We're basically being controlled by the white man. So not only does it absolve these guys of responsibility, it basically just sends the blame into a place it doesn't need to be sent. And so again, this could happen again. And instead of news outlets like CNN or Sky News or MSNBC or whoever else it is, just putting the blame on these thugs and making it so that places like Memphis or wherever else hire police officers that are fit to do the job, they just say white supremacy. And then what does that fix? Where's the actual problem there? You're just saying white supremacy. Oh, it's a racist institution. These black men were not acting of their own accord. Do you know how much bullshit that is? Do you hear people saying that when a bunch of black guys go and kill another black teenager? How many times do we get shootings around here or stabbings where a black kid has killed another black kid? Do you say it's white supremacy then? There's a video on Instagram of some guy walking up to this other teenager saying, "Are you so-and-so?" And the guy's like, "Yeah," and they just fire shots off. Is it white supremacy when there's thugs on the streets killing each other? Or is it only when it's the police officers? Like, when are we just going to take some accountability for our behavior and just accept that, yeah, there's a problem with the police. There's a problem with black on black crime. There's a problem with white police officers killing white people. There's a problem across the board, and shifting blame when it's not convenient for you isn't going to help anyone. This guy was murdered for no reason by thugs, because they're thugs, not because of white supremacy.
When 5 black police officers pulled him over, the letter said it was for reckless driving. There's no evidence to substantiate that. It's still unclear why they stopped him. What is clear is that Tyre Nichols was subjected to a savage and horrific beating, taking sustained blows from the officers as he cried out for his mother, and he died 3 days later. The beating was captured on body cam and CCTV. Well, that is just what it looks like. It's 5 black officers beating a black man. Horrific, appalling, incredibly hard to watch. I'm not surprised by the global revulsion to this brutality, but what I am surprised by is the immediate attempts by many high-profile liberal commentators to blame this on racism and white supremacy. Here's CNN commentator Van Jones.
Black people are at risk from police no matter what color. Black, white, brown, you talk to African Americans, they'll tell you it doesn't matter. There's this pervasive view from law enforcement that if you're black, you're dangerous.
Really? So black people killed a black person, and that's racist. Well, Black Lives Matter issued a statement saying that all police represent the interests of capitalism and impel state-sanctioned violence. Anyone who works within a system that perpetuates state-sanctioned violence is complicit in upholding white supremacy.
Which is pretty funny coming from Black Lives Matter, considering all of the destruction they caused throughout America after George Floyd died. We all saw the buildings and the shops and the streets and the cars and the riots. So it's funny. Are you upholding white supremacy? There were black people that were killed in those riots as well. There was a black police officer that was killed in those riots. So are you guys white supremacists that will go against everything that you're supposed to stand for? This narrative makes no sense to me. It just lacks complete accountability. It's actually very irritating. As someone that is half black, you know, watching that shit go down, it's not like I haven't seen black people killing black people before. To hear liberal pundits and people on the news blaming white people, it's just, I can't stand it when people are not accountable for their own behavior. And I don't mean that across the board. Obviously, there's minor things where like you take time to learn certain things. But when you beat someone to death and then completely shift the blame to people that weren't even there, white people, that is irritating. Especially when you're on the news saying that stuff, because you get people that watch CNN that actually believe the nonsense that comes out of their mouths.
So these 5 black police officers were white supremacists, apparently. Jamil Hill from The Atlantic agreed, explaining the entire system of policing is based on white supremacist violence. Again, apparently nothing to do with just 5 horrible thugs wearing police uniforms killing a black man. It was apparently about racism and white supremacy that is coming out. It's been coming here from people as well, that somehow this is all about racism and white supremacy. It's not. It's about 5 poorly trained, thuggish black police officers killing a black man who did nothing to deserve it. That's it.
Okay, so I just have to start with saying that video was absolutely disgusting. One of the worst videos I've ever seen in my entire life.
And it goes on and on and
yeah,
on.
Yeah, it was disgusting. There was 2 versions of it: the body footage, and of course the pole from across the road. Absolutely disgusting. So I'm absolutely horrified at the fact that, of course, it was 5 black people. But for me personally, this is about an abuse of power and a disregard of human life, and those individuals need to be accountable for their actions. That I need to.
Don't disagree. What's it got to do with racism and white supremacy?
So people
Why are
also,
white people responsible for this?
Okay, so people could also argue that this is due to internalized racism, which is a byproduct of societal or institutional racism, also referred to as white supremacy.
So black police officers become...
That's such a cop-out. Such a cop-out. It's pathetic that someone would say something like that. You really think that these black police officers had internalized racism? What she said in the beginning was accurate. It was an abuse of power and a complete disregard for human life. That's what it was. That's the exact same thing that happens when you get these gang leaders and these thugs on the streets who target someone walking home, someone they don't like, someone that's not in their area code or their postcode. They abuse their standing in that area because they know they can't be touched there. They disregard human life. They disregard the fact that these people have families to go home to, they have futures, they've got all these plans. They disregard all of that. They take their lives because they're abusing their power. And they wouldn't do those things if they were in opposing area codes. That is what an abuse of power is. That has nothing to do with white supremacy at all. And the fact that these police officers these guys are police officers doesn't change that. It's not worth even entertaining that idea. You can't be a black guy looking at another black guy on the floor screaming for his mom and then continue to throw punches in his face and then even try to entertain the idea that a white man told you to do it, unless he literally told you to do it out of his own mouth and you went and did it. And then you're just an idiot.
Black police officers become white supremacist racists who kill black people because they work in an atmosphere of white supremacy. Is that it?
I can explain it a little bit better. Okay, so anti-blackness is baked into society here and in the US, and black people are not impervious to that. And so what people fail to realise...
So black people are anti-black?
Yep, this exactly. So let me explain it. I know it's very confusing. So let me explain it, Piers. So what people fail to realise is that when black people have to contend with racism, they can end up internalising it. And that can result in low self-esteem, self-loathing, and rejection of one's community. And when you combine those feelings, which, as we know, are also referred to as unconscious bias. When you have those feelings and they are compounded by hierarchy and power, it can lead to an individual abusing said power and projecting their self-hate onto another. And this is why, in my opinion, why we see black and white police officers killing more black people than we do white. Reason why is because of racism, which includes internalized racism, Piers.
Right. I think that's complete nonsense.
You would, because you're a white man and you don't understand.
Exactly. I'm white, therefore
No,
my
you don't
skin colour
understand it.
means
No,
I have...
because you don't have the lived experience.
My skin colour means I have
No, I
nothing
mean,
to
no
do
disrespect.
with it.
It's
All right, well,
I mean, that's nonsense. In this area especially, right, we have a high number of this area and the surrounding areas. We have a high number of black on black crime. If the police officers are going to be violent towards anyone, it's going to be towards the people committing the crime. If there's a large number of black people committing crime in the area, those are the people that are going to be targeted. And those are the ones that are going to be at higher risk of being killed. Now, should they be killed is another discussion. Obviously not. Police officers are not supposed to be they're not there to kill people unless it absolutely calls for it and they've got no other option. If you go to, I don't know, where's a predominantly white place? Let's just say a predominantly white place. Majority of the criminals there are going to be white. So majority of the people killed by police officers are going to be white. And that's what I think it comes down to. Now, if there's I read a statistic that in America, black people make up 16% of the population, but commit 51% of the crime. Wow. Now, I don't know if that statistic is accurate, and I don't remember why I read it, so I can't cite it. So if someone in the comment section wants to look and correct me, that's fine. But I remember reading it, and if that is the case, that is a disproportionate amount of crime being committed. Now, again, does that mean that they should be killed by police officers when they're pulled up? Obviously not. There's going to be certain situations where you're in a shootout, for example. If you're shooting at police officers, you're kind of forfeiting your life. But in situations where they're committing petty crimes, like maybe if that guy was speeding, you don't pull him out of his car and beat him to death. But
No, not for that.
yeah, it stands to reason that if a small number of the population is committing majority of the crime, obviously more of their interactions are going to be violent with the police, just a numbers game. So I can take on board what she's saying, but also acknowledge the fact that the data's there. And if the numbers that I'm quoting are correct, then there's also a problem there. And there's other problems for why there might be so many black communities in America turning to crime. That's another issue that needs to be looked at. But the fact that there needs to be some sort of fix for that doesn't negate the fact that is happening.
Go to a black man and see if he's allowed to have a view. Zubi, what's your view?
Okay, so I agree with the first half of everything that was said there. I agree that the video was disgusting. I agree that this is an issue of training, and I agree that this is an issue of the human heart. I think that any attempt to put the blame on this in any way, shape, or form on racism or white supremacy or white people in general is absolutely ridiculous. I also think it's pretty degrading because this sort of idea stems from the notion that black people, black men, black women, that we do not have full agency and responsibility and therefore accountability for our actions and our words. We end up in these ridiculous situations where no matter the permutation, no matter what happens, even if there's not a single white person involved in the situation, in the Memphis police force, even the police chief is a black woman. The large percentage of the force is black, and people are still trying to lean on this white supremacy is the answer and the reason for everything. And honestly, it's lame. And as someone who's lived my entire life as a black male, certainly I've never been possessed by this sort of phantom of white supremacy that's made me want to attack anybody, let alone another black person. And I think that we need to put the blame and responsibility squarely on the individuals who were involved in this.
I completely
I
agree.
think it's tragic that this young man died.
That's basically what I said, right?
Yeah.
They literally every single time they try to rob black people of their agency as if they are not responsible for their own behavior. And I hear this come out of people's mouths all the time. And all it serves is the people that committed the crime. Because it's like, oh, it's not our fault. We were indoctrinated. We were raised this way. This is what the institution teaches. We like you said, this phantom white supremacy that possesses black people to go out there and harm other black people. It's just nonsense. We should always put the blame squarely on criminals. Those guys were criminals. They're thugs. They should be thrown in prison. They should throw the key away. They murdered a man on camera. It was not necessary. I don't understand why you would try to absolve them at all. That's what you're doing. By putting the blame on something else, you are absolving them.
I agree. I mean, just to note some statistics about the Memphis Police Department, that 65% of Memphis population is black. 58% of the entire police force in Memphis is black. The police chief was a black woman, right? And so on and so on. So you take all that in totality, you think, well, okay, well, where is this institutionalized white supremacy coming from, given the institution is actually served predominantly by black people for a population that is predominantly black as well? So I don't get that point. The second point I make is this. I think there's a wider issue here. The demonization of the police in America, calling them all a bunch of vile racists, has led to many older, experienced, good police officers who are not vile racists quitting the force all over the country. And as a result, in Memphis, for example, they had a massive reduction, 20% between 2011 and 2017 of police officers. 20% went from the force. And so to try and restore the numbers, they made it easier to become a police officer. They reduced the restrictions, reduced the qualifications. 2 of the 5 officers involved in killing this poor young man went through that process in that period of not being required to have the same sort of qualifications that they used to join the Memphis Police Department. So you have a bunch of people being brought in who are poorly trained, who are not qualified to do the job, who end up committing this kind of crime. That has nothing to do with racism and white supremacy. That has everything to do, I think, with perhaps an over-demonized force in general, with a lot of bad apples in it, but over-demonized force leading to many people quitting and being replaced with people just not up to the job.
Police officers were quitting. One, because they were scared for their lives following things that have happened recently. And, rightfully so, I understand. They're still human beings. I don't think anyone in their right mind thinks all police officers are bad. That's a stupid notion to even entertain. But if you're demonizing an entire force and then they're leaving, that's one thing. You can say whatever you want about those people. But if they're looking to fill the numbers, what do you think they're going to do? They do this for everything. They lower the criteria so more people can enter. If you lower the criteria, the quality of people you get through are not going to be as good. I don't know what the fix is. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I've got all the answers. But if we lower the criteria of anything and then if you do that with food, right? If you cheap out on your ingredients, you get shit food.
Yeah.
You have to invest, especially in something where people are protecting and serving. If you're just hiring people and some of them have criminal backgrounds or some of them haven't been trained properly or vetted properly, obviously there's a training problem there. Probably you need to fund the training properly so they have proper trainers, people in recruitment that are doing their jobs correctly and not lowering the criteria. That might solve some of the problems. I'm sure it's not going to solve all of them. But if you hire idiots, you're going to get a shit job. There's no two ways about it.
I think everything that you've said, I don't disagree with. I think it's not about conflating the two things. It's just about presenting a different perspective, an alternative perspective that should be considered, because internal racism is a real thing, so therefore it should be considered.
You just heard a black man, in a very considered way, say that basically you're talking nonsense. The idea that you
I'll ask that. So Zubi, do you believe that internal racism is nonsense? Do you believe that black people cannot internalize racism? Do you believe that?
I don't believe that it's completely impossible.
Okay.
I don't think it's impossible for
I
don't think it's impossible for a person of any race or ethnicity to harbor hatred or animosity towards people who may look like them or share some things in common. What I completely disagree with is the idea that in every single one of these situations, that no matter what happens, we just jump to white supremacy is the problem. We've seen this happen many, many times.
And I agree with you.
And I think one of the biggest issues with it is, I think one of the biggest issues as well is it's actually a distraction from a very important conversation, which Piers was leaning into there, which is that when it comes to the police in the USA and also in other countries, there's clearly an issue of character, qualifications,
and prejudice.
Training. I don't know exactly. Yeah, and
prejudice is the foundation for all forms of discrimination, including sexism, misogyny, racism, and the list goes on. So if you have not dealt with your prejudice within an institution, it will manifest in racism. That's a fact. That's a fact.
You're talking over.
That's a fact.
I think
I'm
making a good point. But secondly, you're bringing in prejudice, bigotry, racism, none of which had anything to do with this particular incident.
What are you talking about? I just explained to you internal racism, which is based off of prejudice.
It had nothing to do with why these thugs
And I said it should be considered.
killed this man.
I said it should be considered.
Well, let Zubi finish the point you were making.
Okay, okay. Even following on from that point, I'd also say this is mind reading as well. So even trying to bring racism into this conversation, let's say these guys did not have guns and badges. Let's say this was just a group of random thugs, 5 black men beating up another black man. Even in that situation, even outside the police force, I've still seen situations where people try to blame this somehow on this specter of white supremacy. And as I've said, frankly, it's embarrassing.
And I
as a
don't
black
subscribe to
person,
that,
I have
just to make
just
that
as much
clear.
agency and accountability. Okay. As I said, black people have full responsibility and accountability, just like it would be ridiculous to see a video of white people beating up a white man. There are videos out there of white police beating up white people.
Well, I would also make
and
the point
idea
that
that
Have you
this
seen
is
loads of
some sort
videos
of
of
Well, I would
internalized
also,
racism
look,
is
That's
if I
silly.
could
a
just,
rare video.
on
It's
that
very
point,
rare,
I would also make the point that if people genuinely believed it was racism, then given these scenes were as horrific as the George Floyd killing, in my view, no better, no worse. I mean, this went on for a much longer period and was disgusting and abhorrent to watch. Completely innocent guy just getting beaten and then he died. Given that, if it was racism that people genuinely believe was the motivation, we would see the same scenes on the streets of cities all over America that we saw after George Floyd's death. We would see the riots. We would see burning cities. We would see that kind of intensity.
No, we wouldn't. We will only see that if the media tells people to react that way. This is not the first time police officers have killed a black man. We know this. Whether the guy was being violent or not, whether someone was like, because there's plenty of police killings where they were completely unjustified. Unless the media makes people angry, they're not going to go out and do what they did when George Floyd was killed. Now, if this guy was killed by white police officers, you best believe it would have been the second coming of Jesus out there. They would have burned those streets to the ground. Not because they actually care about these people, because you know what people are like. The news cycle keeps going. This guy's name will be forgotten by majority of the people in the coming days. Most people don't remember the guy that was killed by the police officers in Kenosha. Most people don't remember the myriad of black people that have been killed by police officers, whether they were armed or unarmed. They don't remember. They only remember George Floyd's name because the media made them remember. That's one thing people need to remember. They don't care as much as they think they do. It's just that the media knows how to wind people up. We see it with all sorts of things. All sorts of things. This is slightly off topic, but the media did this whole thing where Trump had classified documents in his house. I don't know why he had them in his house, but Joe Biden had classified documents in his house as well. Now, the media's response to Trump having them in the house was like he stole classified documents from the Vatican and went on a run. The media's response to Biden was very tame. It was like they mentioned it and then it kind of went away. You didn't really hear any of these leftists talking about it. It was whatever. And people were up in arms when Trump did it. And I don't know if they should be. I don't really know much about that stuff, but it's just the way they paint things. The way they paint things is what will get people to react. People don't care about George Floyd's passing as much as they think. As controversial as that might sound to say, this guy was killed in cold blood in 4K, and we haven't seen the same sort of outcry, and we definitely haven't seen the same sort of response from the media.
Reaction. But the truth is, even the people claiming this is about racism and white supremacy, they don't believe it. Because if they did believe that, if they did believe that, they'd be out on the streets saying it. And they're not.
They are saying it. They are saying it because they do believe it.
But they're not protesting in the same way because in their heart they know it's not racism.
Okay, so I agree with you in that. I've always said that. I don't subscribe to any type of hypocrisy, right? So if white people are going to kill black people, we should be outraged. If black people kill black people, we should be outraged. So therefore, there are many things that Sabi have said that I agree with. There are many things that you have said that I agree with. But what I'm also trying to say is that firstly, this is about abuse of power and a disregard of life. Individuals should have should make sure that they are accountable for.
Well, we can all agree on that.
That is clear, but we also need to take into account that black people internalise racism and they can perpetuate that racism within institutions. That is a fact.
Yeah, I'll tell you what is a fact. This was 5 black police officers killing a black man, not because of racism and white supremacy or because anything a white person had done.
Played a role.
You don't know if it played a role though. You're assuming that they have internalized racism. Like Zubi said, we're not mind readers. No investigation has been done to say these guys have white supremacy or that they've been influenced by white supremacy. You're just assuming that. If you want to entertain the idea to help yourself sleep at night, you can do that. But in reality, it was just 5 thugs killing someone on camera, and they happened to wear police uniform. Because, as Piers said, the police force was reduced because good police officers tapped out, and they hired a bunch of idiots. That's what happens when you hire idiots to do a job. I don't understand how she can say that with a straight face. Zubi, and funnily enough, Piers are the only ones that have made any fair points in this. She's just made a bunch of assumptions. Internalized racism, I'm sure it exists. I'm sure white people internalize racism all the time. We hear them putting themselves down all the time.
Yeah.
We've done loads of videos on it. If a white person started going on a killing spree and we didn't know what the motive was, you can't just make assumptions. You can't make those assumptions. And you certainly can't do it in this case, because this is quite a serious offense, what these guys have done. And you're kind of like almost trying to shift blame to something else, as if they were mind controlled. You know, like they were possessed by this phantom, as Zubi said. It's ridiculous.
But because they actually didn't know how to do their jobs, it got completely out of control. They behaved like a mob, a frenzied mob,
Just like
and they
white people do
completely
when they beat up black people, right?
lost control.
Because they're thugs as well. When white police beat up black
know what?
people, they're also thugs as well. Because black people aren't just thugs when they beat up black people.
Yeah, I didn't
and
say
white people can also be perceived as
Yeah,
thugs when they beat up black people. Let's just be clear on your
Iman,
language.
you can
please.
keep
No,
saying
just
whatever
be
you want.
clear on your
This had
language.
nothing to do with racism or white supremacy. And as Zubi rightly
called them black
says,
thugs, though, didn't
I
you?
actually think
You
it's
called them black
embarrassing.
thugs, though, didn't you?
They
Where do
were
you think
black
that from?
thugs.
Okay, but you don't call white people black thugs when they kill black
say
people,
one?
though,
Can I
do
say
you?
one?
Obviously don't call white people black thugs, you dumbass. Now she's speaking out about us. Those guys were thugs. And the white police officers that kill black people in cold blood are also thugs. But no white police officers were involved in this. So why are we talking about white people? This was black on black crime. Again. This has nothing to do with white people. She just couldn't help herself. I knew she was gonna.
Yeah,
I knew this was gonna
but
devolve.
She's also going on like as if to say Piers Morgan's the only person who said that.
Yeah, you got a black guy right here saying they're thugs, and any black person with any sense would say those people are thugs, and any white person with sense would be able to identify that those were thugs. I don't know if this woman realizes, but thugs come in all shapes and sizes and all colors. And these ones happen to be black, and they were wearing a badge.
Don't
More
call
thing
them
here,
what? I call
Piers.
white people white.
You
I
don't.
call white thugs
don't.
white thugs.
You
Of course I
don't.
do. Of course I do.
There is far more emphasis
Earth, are
on
you
black
talking
people.
about?
There is far more emphasis. This is the
Nonsense.
reality of media. There is
Can
far more
I
emphasis
jump
on
in
black
here?
people.
Final word to Zubi.
Connotations like thugs.
Final word to
Yeah,
Zubi.
can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I think that in all of our in both the U.S. and in the U.K., when we can have these conversations without the words white and black even being brought into the picture, then I think we'll be making some
So
good
you're
headway.
offering colourblind,
We can have some
which is
serious
irrational.
I
conversations
totally
about
agree.
police
And actually,
reform.
Colourblind is
I actually
nonsensical and
completely agree with that.
irrational,
If
and
we
I'm quite
purely-
disappointed that you said
If
that
we
as a black
purely
man.
talked about the police brutality here in that context without mentioning skin colour,
wouldn't get anywhere.
We would actually get somewhere to
No, we
trying to help the situation. But by making it about race where it doesn't exist, we actually cause more problems than
internalized
we're already
racism.
there. Iman, thank you.
She went from let's entertain the idea to being stuck on the idea that it's internalized racism. Again, absolving these guys of responsibility for what they did. And what they did was they behaved like a bunch of thugs, because that's what they are, and they killed someone. She was talking a whole bunch of nonsense, and Piers is right. This is a blue problem. This is not a white problem. This is not a black problem. This is not an Asian problem. This is a blue problem. They abused their power and they killed someone in cold blood. And I dread to think how many people are killed in cold blood that don't get any media attention at all by the police. It's not just in America. They do it in Brazil. They do it over here. We heard that guy had assaulted all those women, the police officer that was recently arrested. I think he assaulted 24 women.
Yeah, I think I heard about that actually.
Yeah. There's a problem in the police force. And again, that's not me saying that I'm against the police. I believe the police are a necessary institution. We need them because we've seen what happens to areas that don't have any police presence. It's even worse. So I don't want that. But the training does need to be improved. They need to not lower the criteria and just let any old idiot do the job, because any old idiot is going to abuse the power. But this has nothing to do with race whatsoever. There's nothing to support that whatsoever. If she can come up with some sort of tangible evidence to support that these guys were possessed by the white supremacy phantom, then fine. But she's assuming. And we can't go on assumptions here. We've got them in 4K beating this guy to death for no reason. They're thugs. And that's it.